This is the story of a man whose ultimate goal is to live his life as the most evil villain. There's just one problem. Every selfish scheme he cooks up and every cruel act he commits is tragically misinterpreted, casting him in the role of a misunderstood saint. To understand his new ambition, we have to look at the life that was so cruelly stolen from him. In his past life, on a world much like our own, he was the classic hero, always putting others first. His final act of goodness was sacrificing himself to save the girl he believed he loved. But his reward wasn't gratitude or a tearful goodbye. It was the chilling sight of her turning her back and leaving him to bleed out on the pavement, completely alone. That bitter memory of betrayal was the only thing he took with him to his next life. He awoke not in a hospital, but in the lavish chambers of a noble's estate, in the body of a young man he didn't recognize. The world outside was one of magic and swords, a realm of fantasy and wonder. He had been reborn as Augur Verret, the eldest son of the notoriously villainous Verret ducal family. This wasn't a curse. It was the ultimate blessing. He had seen firsthand where a life of goodness leads, to being used, discarded, and forgotten. He wouldn't make that mistake again. In that moment, a profound sense of gratitude washed over him. He swore a new oath, not to a god or a king, but to himself. He would live exactly as he pleased, chasing every desire and indulging every whim. On this day, a new ambition was ignited within the heart of Augur Verret. He would dedicate his new life to becoming the most absolute, unshakable villain this world had ever seen. But to become a master, one must first learn from one, and as fate would have it, his teacher was waiting for him. Augur was summoned to a luncheon with his father, the formidable Duke Gordon Verret. When he entered the grand dining hall, Augur apologized for being late, a leftover habit from his past life. His father dismissed it with a wave. Trivialities didn't concern him, not when his heir was showing such promise. He had observed Augur's rigorous dedication to his studies and training, and it filled him with pride. You see, to the world, Duke Gordon Verret was an incompetent buffoon. But this was just a mask. In reality, he was a scheming genius, a master of manipulation hiding in plain sight. He was the perfect example of a magnificent villain, and for Augur, he was not just a father, but a profound inspiration. Augur swore to himself he would absorb every lesson from the man and master his wicked craft. Gordon saw the fire in his son's eyes and decided it was time for his first real test. To officially inherit the Verret name, one of the 4 great ducal families, Augur had one condition: enroll in the prestigious Lisburg Magic Academy. For Augur, this was a tricky proposition. He possessed a one-of-a-kind power, an ace he needed to keep hidden from the world at all costs. But before he could even dwell on that, his father added a second task. He was to select a personal attendant to serve him in the dormitories. When Augur hesitated, his father's lesson was swift and sharp. This wasn't about comfort. It was a crucial exercise in identifying and acquiring valuable human resources, a skill every true villain must master. A spark of genuine villainous excitement ignited within Augur. This was it. This was the first real step. He wouldn't just choose a talented subordinate. That would be far too simple, too boring. His plan was far more deliciously diabolical. He would seek out an individual with an unbreakably strong sense of justice, a person of sterling moral character, and he would corrupt them. He would force this paragon of virtue to carry out evil deeds, twisting their righteous soul to serve his nefarious ambitions. The very thought sent a shiver of delight down his spine. The question was, could he pull it off? He already had a candidate in mind, a fallen hero whose story he had followed with great interest. Excusing himself from the table, his mind already racing, Augur set off to recruit his first accomplice in the grand game of villainy. His journey took him to the outskirts of the royal capital, to a place called Wuxia City, a festering den of lawlessness and violence. Deep beneath the city, in a grimy, blood-soaked underground arena, his target was currently at work. A woman, whose sword skills were a terrifying spectacle of deadly grace, was dispatching every opponent who dared to face her. Her style was a whirlwind of steel, a flurry of strikes so fast and fluid they were dubbed sword swing madness. She moved with an effortless, almost bored nonchalance, wiping out a half-dozen hardened fighters in mere seconds without breaking a sweat. After her match, she cleaned her blade with a detached air, her face an unreadable mask, unfazed by the carnage she had wrought. This was the one. The arena's organizer, a greasy man with shifty eyes, scurried over to her, informing her that a visitor had come to see her. She was led to a back room, and her eyes widened in surprise when she saw who was waiting. It was a boy, a noble child by the looks of him. Confusion clouded her features as Augur, with a calm and measured tone, addressed her by her full name and former title, Chris Ragn, the disgraced former commander of the Holy Knights. Before Chris could react with the hostility that was boiling just beneath her surface, her sharp eyes caught the crest of the Verret family on the hilt of the short sword at Augur's waist. The name Verret sent a jolt through her. They were a family renowned for their mastery of diplomacy and intelligence gathering. A cold, familiar anger began to simmer within her. It was nobles, just like this boy, who had orchestrated her downfall. They were the ones who had framed her, who had stripped her of her honor and cast her out from the Holy Knights. The sight of Augur's composed, privileged face was like salt in a still raw wound. The encounter dragged her back into the depths of her painful memories. She remembered the fire of justice that had once burned so brightly within her. She had been on the trail of a massive human trafficking ring, a network of evil that spread its tendrils throughout the kingdom. With dogged determination, she had uncovered the source, only to find that the masterminds were a cabal of powerful nobles. Full of righteous fury, she had taken her evidence directly to the king, certain that justice would prevail. But she had been naive. The nobles, with their immense wealth and influence, had twisted the narrative, painting her as a liar and a hysteric. The king, a puppet on their strings, had her punished and exiled. They buried the evidence she had collected, and to add the final, crushing insult, they branded her a criminal. Everything she had worked for, her entire identity as a holy knight, had been stolen from her in an instant. Now, she was forced to wield the very sword she had honed for justice in this vile pit, fighting for coin amongst murderers and thieves. The simmering anger boiled over. She lunged forward, grabbing Augur by the lapels of his fine clothing, her knuckles white. Her voice was a low, dangerous growl as she demanded to know what a pampered noble brat could possibly want from a disgraced wretch like her. She poured out her anguish, her words thick with the bitterness of a broken idealist, lamenting that, because of his kind, her sword of justice was now stained with the filth of this arena. Throughout her outburst, Augur remained perfectly still. There was no fear in his eyes, no irritation, only a profound and unsettling disappointment. He told her as much, his voice cutting through her rage with its unnerving calm. He was disappointed in her, he said, for her complete lack of pride. The words struck Chris like a physical blow, silencing her mid-rant. A rush of conflicting emotions washed over her. Augur continued, his tone softening slightly. He assured her that even now, even when she saw herself as nothing more than a fallen knight, he still admired the strength and determination she once possessed. He spoke of the Chris Ragn who had inspired her comrades, who stood unbowed before evil, whose sense of justice burned brighter than anyone's. But the praise felt like a mockery to Chris. She felt that version of herself was long dead. She was now a killer for hire, earning her keep through the same vile methods as the scum she once hunted. There was no going back. The holy knight Chris Ragn was a ghost. Augur, however, refused to accept this. He countered that the death of her old self was not a reason to abandon her purpose entirely. It was, instead, an opportunity to begin anew. With eyes that held a strange, reassuring light, he extended his hand to her. He asked her to join him, promising that he would give her the chance to shine brightly once more. No noble had ever shown her such a thing. They had used her, broken her, and discarded her. This boy, the scion of a villainous house, was offering her a lifeline. It was so unexpected, so convincing, that she felt tears welling up in her eyes. It didn't take long for her resolve to crumble. She accepted his offer, placing her calloused hand in his. She had no way of knowing that this was all part of Augur's meticulously crafted, devilish scheme. In his mind, she was a broken soul, a loser he could easily manipulate. He had just secured his first and most powerful pawn. As they made their way back toward the capital, Augur instructed her that she needed a new identity. Chris Ragn was still a wanted criminal in the public eye. She would need a new name and new clothes. He decided for her, bestowing upon her the name Alice. As they prepared to leave Wuxia City for good, the newly christened Alice asked for one last favor. She needed to return to the arena to prepare for her departure, Augur assumed she meant to retrieve her belongings or weapons. He was left speechless when he saw what she truly meant. He watched from a distance as Alice re-entered the arena and, with cold, methodical precision, slaughtered every single person inside. Not a soul was left breathing. It was a terrifying display of power and a stark reminder for Augur. He had indeed obtained a formidable piece for his chessboard, a significant step toward his goal. But it also served as a sobering lesson. The road to becoming an absolute villain was relentlessly steep, and he would need to be eternally vigilant, even from this very first step. The hallowed halls of the Royal Magic Academy Leesburg awaited them. Known as the finest institution of its kind in the entire country, it was a place exclusively for the children of nobility. For Augur, it was the perfect stage upon which to build the foundation for his villainous empire. On his first day, he made sure to arrive punctually, with his powerful new pawn, Alice, by his side. The moment they stepped onto the grounds, the air began to buzz with whispers. When Alice addressed him as Master Augur, the hushed murmurs grew into a low pervasive hum of gossip. The attention, however, was far from positive. While the Verret family name was universally known, it was also universally disdained. The prevailing sentiment was that Augur was nothing more than a worthless heir, coasting on his family's fearsome reputation. Students huddled in corners, casting scornful glances his way, their whispers carrying on the wind. They called him a loser, speculating that he had only gained admission through his family's connections and political clout. The sheer venom in their words caused a dangerous light to flicker in Alice's eyes. Her hand twitched towards her sword, and it took a direct, firm gesture from Augur to stop her from carving a bloody path through the student body. Still, this hostile reception was exactly what he had anticipated. The Verret family's reputation for villainy naturally bred fear and resentment. In a way, this widespread animosity was a valuable, if troublesome, asset. Now that he had secured Alice, his next objective was clear: to begin assembling his harem. Surveying the female student population, however, the situation looked bleak. The contempt directed at him was a powerful repellent. Just as he was beginning to feel discouraged, a girl with vibrant red hair rushed towards him, her face alight with recognition. At first, Augur was at a loss. He searched his memory, trying to place her, until a name finally surfaced. This was Karen Levitsenka, the sole daughter of the Levitsenka family, another of the 4 great ducal families. More importantly, she was his former fiancée. They hadn't seen each other since they were 5 years old, which explained her slight anxiety that he might not remember her. With Alice looking on curiously, Augur made the introductions. Alice was visibly shocked to learn that her master had once been engaged. The reason for the engagement's cancellation, Karen explained, was a problem on Augur's part. Alice found this impossible to believe. In her eyes, her master was a perfect being, but the world they lived in had a singular, unforgiving metric for perfection: magic. And in a cruel twist of fate, Augur Verret, despite his noble bloodline, possessed absolutely no magic aptitude. He was incapable of casting even the simplest of spells. For a noble, this was a fatal, irredeemable flaw. It was this deficiency that had led Karen's family to annul the engagement and look upon him with disdain. Karen, however, seemed to harbor no such feelings. It was clear from the look in her eyes that Augur still held a special place in her heart, but she couldn't bring herself to say it aloud. Instead, she brushed off the awkward moment and excused herself to attend the entrance ceremony. Augur and Alice followed, making their way to the grand function hall. The moment they entered, the whispers began anew, a chorus of mockery directed at the magicless noble. Alice's killing intent began to spike again, a palpable aura of menace emanating from her. Once more, Augur had to subtly calm her down before she could commit mass murder on their first day. Her fierce loyalty, while dangerous, was also deeply gratifying. Alice murmured to him, her voice full of admiration, that despite the scorn of the entire world, he remained a kind and wonderful person. Augur simply smiled. He was content to let them think that. His grand design required everyone to underestimate him, to see him as a nobody. For now, he would let them have their fun, let them spew their insults. But he was making a list, and sooner or later, every single one of them would pay. With the entrance ceremony concluded, Augur immediately resumed his second mission, scouting for potential harem members. The sheer number of female students was overwhelming, a sea of faces. But just as with Alice, his gaze was not random. He had a specific target in mind, a girl he had already identified. The challenge was finding her in the sprawling academy grounds. His search eventually led him to a secluded courtyard, where he found his target being cornered by a group of bullies. This was his chance to make a grand, heroic entrance. He didn't hesitate for a second. He strode forward, his presence alone enough to command attention. The leader of the bullies, a sneering youth named Luark Bombcell, the second son of Count Bombcell, turned to face him. As soon as Augur introduced himself, a wave of fear washed over the faces of Luark and his cronies. The name Verret, even attached to a loser, still carried immense weight. They scrambled away, shouting empty threats over their shoulders that this wasn't over. With the bullies gone, Augur turned his attention to the girl. The reason he had chosen her was, in his mind, brilliantly and villainously simple: her astoundingly large breasts. He privately marveled at their destructive power, a force of nature that sent a thrill of excitement through him. She was exactly the kind of asset his group needed. For now, however, he had to maintain his gentlemanly facade. He suppressed his lecherous thoughts, smoothed his expression into one of concerned chivalry, and offered the tearful girl his handkerchief. His act was flawless. The girl, her eyes wide with gratitude, looked forward to seeing him at the upcoming new student welcome party. Everything was proceeding according to his masterful plan. The future villain savored the moment, eagerly anticipating his next move. A few days later, the Lisburg Magic Academy Hall was abuzz with activity for the new student welcome party. The room was lavishly decorated, filled with the cream of the kingdom's youth. Augur's eyes were immediately drawn to a young man surrounded by a flock of adoring girls. He wondered who this charismatic individual could be. The answer came soon enough. He was Arnia Ronmel, the crown prince of the kingdom, and the next in line for the throne. And, in a gut punch of a revelation, he was also Karen's new fiancé. The news hit Alice like a physical blow. She was aghast at the sheer audacity of the Levitsenko family. To so callously break off their daughter's engagement to Augur only to betroth her to another. Augur, however, maintained an air of stoic acceptance. What could he do? He was a man with no magic. In this world, that meant he had no right to fight for the woman he was once supposed to marry. Despite his outward calm, Alice's fury on his behalf was incandescent. Her killing intent flared so intensely that it actually caught the attention of the crown prince himself. As a small commotion began to form around them, Augur quickly stepped forward, placing himself between Alice and the prince, explaining that she was with him. The prince seized the opportunity to publicly humiliate Augur, his voice dripping with condescension. He identified Augur as the rumored unqualified student, the magicless noble everyone was talking about. The insult was a direct attack on her master, and it nearly sent Alice over the edge. Before she could act, Augur's hand was on her shoulder, a silent command to stand down. He stepped forward to face the prince himself. Though he had been publicly shamed, Augur's composure was absolute. A faint, almost sarcastic smile played on his lips as he thanked the prince for remembering his name, even without a formal introduction. The prince, enjoying the power play, replied that it was no trouble at all, given how popular Augur had become among the students. The tension between them crackled in the air, thick and palpable. Karen, seeing the situation escalating, tried to intervene, but her position was a precarious one. As Prince Arnia's current fiancé, any overt defense of Augur would create a massive political scandal. Thankfully, the prince, having made his point, decided to back off, leaving Augur to deal with the aftermath. For a moment, Augur felt a pang of frustration, the sting of being unable to fight back, but he was also deeply grateful to Karen. Even though her hands were tied, she had still tried to help him, a small but significant gesture of her lingering affection. Even if the rest of the world had written him off, there was still one person who seemed to believe in him. He knew, with a certainty that burned within him, that their perception of his lack of power was their greatest misunderstanding. One day, they would all bow before him. But for now, a more immediate and exciting prospect occupied his mind. He had received a letter, an unexpected and thrilling development. It was a love letter from Mashiro Laichi, the commoner girl with the magnificent bosom whom he had rescued. She wanted to meet him the next day in the campus backyard to tell him something important. The thought sent a jolt of pure, unadulterated excitement through him, his villainous heart soaring. The following day, he found himself replaying the anticipated meeting in a vivid dream. He arrived at the backyard, and Mashiro immediately thanked him for saving her. She was about to confess her feelings, the very words he longed to hear, when the dream suddenly shattered. He awoke in his bed, the morning sun streaming through his window. It was just a dream, but he felt a powerful sense of premonition. He was certain that dream was about to become a reality. He sprang out of bed, preparing himself for his big day. He hadn't expected a confession from Mashiro so soon. He was confident he could win her over eventually, but this was remarkably fast. Was she just an assertive girl by nature, or had his gentlemanly rescue truly captivated her on their very first day of school? Either way, he was reveling in his newfound status as a sinful, desirable man, exactly as he had always wanted. As he dressed, Alice watched him from the side, her eyes welling up with tears of pure admiration. To her, her master was a radiant being, and seeing him prepare for a romantic rendezvous filled her with the pride of a die-hard fan. Once ready, Augur wasted no time and hurried to their meeting spot. He found Mashiro waiting for him and offered a charming apology for her wait. She smiled, assuring him she was just glad he came. She then thanked him for saving her the other day, her words mirroring his dream almost exactly. Augur braced himself, his heart pounding in anticipation, ready for his wish to be granted. Then she dropped the bomb. She asked him, with a pained expression, to never get involved with her again. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. She explained that being around him caused her trouble, and she had only asked to see him today to return his handkerchief and deliver this devastating message. Augur was reeling. His mind struggled to process the whiplash. Yesterday she had looked at him with such happiness and gratitude. Now she was pushing him away. She claimed that what happened yesterday was just a misunderstanding, a statement that left Augur in a state of utter shock. He couldn't believe it. His flawless, gentlemanly performance had somehow failed. Where had he gone wrong? His eyes darted around the backyard, searching for an answer. And then he saw them. Lurking in the bushes, he spotted Luark and his friends. A sickening realization dawned on him. After a brief, stilted conversation with Mashiro, it became clear. She was friends with them. His heroic act of driving them off yesterday had had the exact opposite effect he'd intended. She must prefer bad boys over gentlemen. The thought was so absurd, so contrary to all his calculations, that he couldn't help but let out a short, bitter laugh. Unbeknownst to him, as Mashiro walked away, her own heart was heavy with disappointment. Deep down, she desperately wanted to be with him, but she had been forced to say those hurtful things. Later, in the cafeteria, Augur sat nursing a cup of coffee, his mind replaying the disastrous encounter. He had to find a way to redeem himself in Mashiro's eyes. She was a prime target for his harem, and he wouldn't give her up so easily. Alice, ever observant, shared her own thoughts. She too was surprised by Mashiro's words, having fully expected the girl to fall head over heels for her master. But Alice had noticed something odd. She pointed out that if Mashiro was truly friends with Luark's group, it made no sense for her to have shown such genuine gratitude when Augur drove them away. Her behavior was contradictory. Alice speculated that there must be another reason for her actions, that something else was at play. The logic of Alice's argument cut through Augur's confusion. He had been so focused on his own performance that he had missed the inconsistencies. Their speculation might be correct, but he decided against immediate action. For now, the best course was to wait and observe. Alice, however, saw this as a test of her abilities. She made it her personal mission to uncover the truth and present it to her master, a tangible clue to solve this puzzle. She would begin tailing Mashiro, watching her every move. Meanwhile, in an old, abandoned school building, Luark and his friends were celebrating their victory. They laughed, congratulating themselves on how easily Augur had fallen for their trick. And there, in the corner, was Mashiro, their captive. It was now clear that she had been coerced, forced to break Augur's heart. But her admiration for Augur had given her a sliver of courage. She finally found her voice and asked Luark why he was doing this, why he was so obsessed with hurting Augur. Luark, his face contorted in a sneer, declared without an ounce of remorse that he simply wanted to see Augur weep. He then ordered Mashiro to call Augur to this building. His new plan was to ambush him, to beat him to a pulp. Luark was confident that, Even if Augur was skilled in hand-to-hand combat, their combined magic would easily overwhelm him. Mashiro, her heart filled with dread for Augur's safety, pleaded with Luark to stop. She had only gone along with his initial plan because he had promised not to physically harm Augur. Now, he was breaking that promise. In that moment, Mashiro realized the profound difference between the nobles she feared and the ones she admired. Most nobles saw commoners like her as disposable, as playthings. But Augur was different. He had protected her, a commoner, without a moment's hesitation. A new resolve hardened within her. This time, she would be the one to stand up for him. Her defiance enraged Luark. With a vicious snarl, he lunged at her, grabbing the front of her shirt and ripping it open, revealing her undergarments to his leering friends. Just as he was about to go further, the door to the old building was kicked open with explosive force. Augur stood silhouetted in the doorway, a figure of calm fury. Luark and his friends, caught in their vile act, froze in shock. Luark was the first to recover, sputtering, asking what Augur was doing here. He had expected to see a broken, weeping boy, not this vision of cold confidence. A smirk played on Augur's lips as he announced that he never took her facade seriously for a moment. The words hit Luark with the force of a physical blow, his face flushing with anger and irritation. He began to believe that Augur had seen through his scheme from the very beginning. The truth, however, was slightly less omniscient. Just moments before, Augur had been sitting alone, letting out a heavy sigh, deeply troubled by his romantic failure. It was then that Alice had appeared, presenting him with the evidence from her magical surveillance camera. He had watched in horrified fascination as the truth unfolded. Mashiro was being harassed, forced to say those things against her will. Her true feelings were the ones she had expressed yesterday. His broken heart was instantly mended, replaced by a surge of protective fury. He had to save her. While he had been genuinely hurt, the rapid recovery and the chance to play the hero once more filled him with a renewed sense of purpose. Luark, however, remained arrogant. He sneered, confident that with their magic, they could easily defeat the magicless Augur. He gathered a ball of fire in his palm and lunged forward. To his utter astonishment, Augur moved with impossible speed, his hand clamping down on Luark's wrist, stopping the attack cold. The spell dissipated harmlessly. Confusion and fear warred on Luark's face. How was this possible? The secret lay in Augur's unique ability. Since he couldn't use magic, he had developed a technique to do the next best thing: erase it. Luark, frantically trying to cast spells from different angles, found every single one nullified before it could even form. The horrifying realization that his magic was useless against this boy began to dawn on him. When he finally understood the sheer futility of his efforts, his will to fight shattered. He gave up, slumping in defeat. Augur seized the opportunity, striking the ground with such force that Luark, overwhelmed by fear, lost consciousness. With the threat neutralized, Augur immediately turned his attention to Mashiro. He gently covered her exposed body with his own jacket, his touch surprisingly gentle. Still stunned, Mashiro finally found her voice, asking him how he had made the magic disappear. Augur explained his delete skill, a technique he had honed over years of secret training, which allowed him to nullify magic under specific conditions. Mashiro, her eyes full of tears, worried that he would now hate her and punish her for her role in the deception. Augur quickly reassured her that he wasn't angry. As for her punishment, he did have something in mind. His eyes twinkled with a mischievous light. First, she was to keep his technique an absolute secret. Second, she was never to cry like this again. Third, she was to ignore anyone who looked down on her for being a commoner. And for her ultimate punishment, the most severe of all, she was to come with him and stay by his side from that day forward. Without a moment's hesitation, Mashiro threw her arms around him, accepting his offer with a sob of pure, unadulterated joy. She hugged him tightly, showing her immense gratitude. Augur, for his part, found himself quite enjoying the moment, especially the sensation of Mashiro's magnificent melons pressed against his chest. He had successfully taken another major step toward completing his harem. Their reign of supremacy had just begun, and he was thrilled by the possibilities that lay ahead. Unseen by them, a figure watched from the shadows of a nearby building. A woman with an amused smile observed the trio, thinking to herself that this year at the academy was shaping up to be far more interesting than she had anticipated. In the aftermath of the incident, Luark and his friends were promptly expelled, their futures forever tarnished by the label of perverts. The days that followed settled into a comfortable rhythm. Augur dedicated himself to his physical training, pushing his body to its limits day in and day out. Alice was his constant shadow, the perfect attendant. She added weights to his workout equipment, prepared his meals with meticulous care, and simply watched over him with unwavering devotion. Alice found herself constantly amazed by her master's physical prowess. She had always believed that nobles were physically frail, relying solely on their magic and status. Her master was a stunning exception. Meanwhile, Augur was deep in his own thoughts, contemplating the reason for his unique constitution. He theorized that since he had been reincarnated without a magic aptitude, a common trait among nobles, his body had been granted exceptional physical strength as a form of compensation. If that were true, he needed to polish this power, to hone his body into an unstoppable weapon. One morning, during his training, Mashiro appeared, greeting him with a cheerful, "Good morning." The sight of her gave him an immediate adrenaline rush. He had always dreamed of having a cute childhood friend, and he was determined to cultivate that dynamic with Mashiro. He forbade her from using formal language with him, and hearing her call him Augur sent a wave of pure delight through him. With Mashiro now officially part of his inner circle, he instructed Alice to act as her bodyguard whenever he wasn't around, still wary after the incident with Luark. He then announced that he had been summoned by a certain important person and needed to prepare for a meeting. After a quick bath and a change of clothes, Augur made his way to the faculty building. He stopped before a massive ornate door on the top floor, taking a deep breath to steel his nerves. The person he was about to meet was none other than Floan Mulaney, the legendary principal of the academy. In her prime, she was known as Lightning Strike Floan, a hero whose name was etched into the annals of the kingdom's history. Even in retirement, she radiated an aura of immense power. Augur could feel no decline in her strength as he entered her office. The room was filled with a surprisingly warm and welcoming energy. Despite the principal's pleasant demeanor, Augur couldn't shake the nervousness that prickled his skin. Floan, sensing his unease, assured him there was nothing to be afraid of. She had simply called him in to thank him for something. Augur was perplexed. Thank him for what? The answer, when it came, was a complete surprise. She wanted to thank him for what he had done, for Mashiro Laisha. This was a shock. He never imagined the principal of the entire academy would take a personal interest in a commoner student, let alone summon him directly to express gratitude for saving her. He immediately suspected an ulterior motive. Then, Floan dropped a bombshell that sent his world into a spin. She explained that in this world, it was the norm for a person to be born with a single magic aptitude. However, on rare occasions, a child was born with multiple aptitudes. Mashiro Laichi, she revealed, was one of these rare exceptions. She was a dual magic caster, possessing aptitudes for both wind and ice attributes, making her an incredibly valuable and sought-after talent. Augur was floored. He had chosen Mashiro purely based on the size of her breasts. To think he had stumbled upon such a rare and powerful individual by sheer lecherous chance was both amazing and slightly embarrassing. He had completely failed to notice this crucial piece of information. The principal expressed her relief that such a rare talent had not been ruined by the incident with Luark, and she reiterated her sincere thanks for his intervention. After their brief meeting, Augur headed to class, his mind reeling. His path of evil was proceeding smoothly. He had secured a powerful fighter in Alice and a rare talent for his harem in Mashiro. Yet, something felt off. He was trying to be a villain, but he kept getting thanked for his actions. It was a frustratingly virtuous turn of events. Little did he know, the principal's motives were far from benign. In her private thoughts, Floan was seething. She had her own plans for Mashiro Laishi, plans that involved using the girl as a subject for her clandestine experiments. Augur had, in her view, stolen a valuable asset from her. His actions were an unforeseen and unwelcome complication. Furthermore, she was familiar with the former knight he had taken as his attendant. She knew Alice was a monster who had risen to the rank of Holy Knight Commander on pure sword skill alone. And now, this enigmatic boy also had a dual magic caster under his protection. But what concerned Floan the most was Luark Bombzell's testimony. After his expulsion, Luark had frantically described how his magic had been mysteriously erased by Augur. The idea of such an ability, a direct counter to her own immense magical power, was terrifying. She refused to believe it was possible, yet the seed of doubt had been planted. She couldn't decipher Augur's objective, but she was convinced he was planning to become an obstacle to the grand dream she had been chasing for so many years. She, lightning strike flown, would not allow some upstart noble boy to stand in her way, especially not now, when she was so close to the finish line. As a precaution, she summoned one of her trusted students, Rihanna Mulaney, and gave her a new mission: keep a very close eye on Augur Verit. Back in the classroom, Alice and Mashiro were growing worried. Augur was unusually late. Just as their anxiety peaked, he walked in, reassuring them with a calm smile that he was fine. While they breathed a collective sigh of relief, Augur was still pondering his meeting with the principal. Why would she make such a point of thanking him? Was it simply because she valued Mashiro's magic, or was there a deeper, more sinister reason? To find the truth, he decided he needed to see Mashiro's dual magic for himself. He declared that they were skipping class, causing a minor commotion as he led Mashiro out of the room, too eager to wait any longer. He took her to the practice building, a place usually off-limits to first-year students. He asked her to show him her dual magic, and Mashiro, excited to finally demonstrate her abilities to her master, readily agreed. She tried to force the heavy door open but stumbled from the effort. At that moment, a new figure entered the scene. A stunningly beautiful girl with an authoritative air informed them that first years were forbidden from using the practice tower. She introduced herself as Rena Mulaney, the student council president of Lisburg Magic Academy. Augur recognized the name immediately. She was Floan's star disciple, a prodigy known as the child loved by Kid. Her talent and appearance were legendary, even outside the academy. But what truly captured Augur's attention was a more corporeal asset. Her breasts were even more magnificent in person than in the photos he had seen. He found himself staring, completely mesmerized, for a moment too long. Rena, noticing his gaze, called him out with a playful, flirtatious tone. Her teasing made Mashiro visibly uncomfortable. Rena cornered Mashiro, demanding to know why they were there. Augur, ever cool, stepped in and explained that class was boring, so they had decided to practice on their own. Hearing this, Rena made them an offer. As a courtesy, she would personally give them a practical course. For Augur, this was a golden opportunity. A private lesson from a prodigy like Rena was priceless, and it would be invaluable for his research into his delete skill. He was about to accept when Rena revealed the catch. He would have to join the student council in exchange. The pieces clicked into place in Augur's mind. It was too much of a coincidence for both the principal and her top student to approach him in such quick succession. This was a trap. Rena was pretending to be kind, but her real goal was to bring him under her, and by extension, the principal's control. She wanted to make him her pawn. With a newfound clarity and a firm voice, Augur flatly declined her offer. He stated unequivocally that he had no intention of working under her or becoming anyone's subordinate. His blunt refusal seemed to amuse Rena more than offend her. The tension between them was broken by the sudden arrival of Alice, who came rushing in, completely oblivious to the charged atmosphere. She immediately went to Augur, pouting, asking why they had left her behind. Augur, with an awkward smile, explained that he'd had an impulsive idea to test something. It was only then that Alice noticed Rena. Before any introductions could be made, Rena simply smiled and said that she understood his position. She added that her offer was still open, and should he change his mind, he could contact her anytime. She would be waiting. As soon as Rena was out of sight, she ducked into a nearby restroom and let out a huge sigh of relief. Staring at her reflection, she contemplated her failure. Her usual tactics of manipulation and charm hadn't worked. She grimaced, adjusting the foam padding in her bra. Her impressive cleavage was a complete fabrication, a tool for manipulating men. Since her plan had failed, she resolved to work harder, to find a new way to ensnare him. Meanwhile, Augur was puzzling over Rena's easy retreat. It seemed too simple, but since things had worked out in his favor, he decided not to dwell on it. Alice, however, was still demanding answers. To placate her, he explained that the principal had told him about Mashiro being a dual magic caster, and he had wanted to see it for himself before being interrupted. Hearing this, Alice's mind immediately went to work. She proposed a perfect solution. A friend of hers from her Holy Night days now ran an orphanage, which had recently been targeted by scoundrels trying to seize the land. Her friend had issued a quest to drive them away. It was, Alice suggested, the perfect opportunity to test Mashiro's magic in a real-world scenario. Augur considered the idea. Saving an orphanage had a certain appeal. Children, after all, were the future workforce. They were like treasures. If he could put them in his debt, he could secure a lifetime supply of loyal laborers. The villainous potential was immense. Without a second thought, he agreed to Alice's plan. Mashiro, thrilled at the prospect of helping people, was equally enthusiastic. A few days later, on a bright weekend morning, the trio set off for the orphanage. On the way, Augur asked Alice for more details. The orphanage was in a quiet city, located just outside the royal capital. It was a peaceful place, but its proximity to the lawless Wuxia city, where Alice's old arena was located, was concerning. Augur wondered if the crime from Wuxia had bled over into this city. When they arrived, the land seemed unremarkable. There was nothing of obvious value, which made the harassment all the more puzzling. As they explored, they came across a group of thugs abusing a woman in a nun's habit. Augur didn't hesitate. He moved in a blur, dispatching the men with swift, brutal efficiency. Within seconds, they were all on the ground, groaning in pain. He planned to interrogate them and resolve the matter quickly. But before he could, Alice stepped forward and made a grand, booming announcement. She declared him to be Augur Verit, a savior who brought light, punished evil, and dispelled all darkness, a champion of justice. The words, while heartwarming, were utterly mortifying for Augur. He was trying to be a villain, not a paladin. What was even more confusing was the reaction of the thugs and the nun they had been harassing. They stared at him with expressions of shock and disbelief, as if he had just told a terrible, inappropriate joke. It was then that Augur realized the nun must be Alice's friend, the client. But he had no time to ponder this, as one of the remaining thugs lunged at him with a sword. Augur dodged effortlessly, showing no mercy as he and Alice finished subduing the rest of the group. As night began to fall, they made their way to the church that served as the orphanage. The nun, Sister Mio, formally introduced herself. She had consulted Alice about the harassment, but she had never expected a high-ranking nobleman like Augur to personally intervene. She looked at him with eyes full of admiration, praising his kindness and his concern for the common people. He, of course, had been motivated by the prospect of acquiring free labor. The children of the orphanage soon came out to greet them. Seeing them, a wave of villainous glee washed over Augur. These little ones would be his future workers. He needed to establish his dominance from the very beginning, to make them see him as their absolute superior. He put on his most intimidating expression, puffed out his chest, and introduced himself as the eldest son of the great Duke Verit. He declared that he had come to take them all under his protection, claiming them as his own. He expected them to be terrified. Instead, they looked at him as if he were just another kid. They even called him weak. It turned out that nobles were not well received in this particular orphanage. His attempt at intimidation had backfired spectacularly. Alice, sensing the awkwardness, quickly shooed the children outside to play. Augur, struggling to maintain his composure, reminded himself that he was an adult and had more important work to do. With the children gone, Alice began her interrogation of the captured men. At first, they were defiant, but under the threat of her cold, sharp steel, they quickly broke. They confessed they were working for a man named Alibon. At the mention of the name, Alice's expression turned to ice. She leaned in, her voice a low whisper, and demanded his address. Once she had the information, she declared that they would raid his headquarters the next day. Meanwhile, Sister Mio approached Augur, looking worried. She presented him with a small, meager purse of coins, the reward she had managed to scrape together. Augur, seeing the paltry sum, immediately refused it. Sister Mio, misinterpreting his refusal as an insult, insisted she would gather more. Augur, trying to be polite, gave her an intimidating look, emphasizing that he didn't need it. This only made things worse. Sister Mio assumed he was offended by the small amount, a grave insult to a member of the Verit house. The truth was, Augur was acting out of a strange, unfamiliar sense of courtesy. As he was about to leave the church, the children rushed back in. One of them, a plucky little boy, took a running kick at Augur. With lightning-fast reflexes, Augur scooped the boy up before the kick could land, leaving the child flustered and impressed by his strength. In that moment, the other children began to see him in a new light. Maybe this noble wasn't so bad after all. Augur turned back to Sister Mio and reiterated that he wanted no reward. He told her to use the money to buy the children delicious food for the entire week. The gesture brought tears to Sister Mio's eyes. It wasn't just his kindness, it was the fact that this was the first time the children had laughed and played so freely since the harassment began. Later, Alice shared what she knew about their enemy. Alabon was a remnant from the Wuxia City arena, one of the fighters who had managed to escape her purge. Alice was certain she had killed everyone present that day, but she had overlooked a rare possibility. Sometimes, fighters were given a day off. Alabon must have been one of the lucky few. His goal was likely to build a new arena, and this secluded, overlooked orphanage was the perfect location. A heavy realization settled on Augur. This whole situation was technically their fault. It was a consequence of Alice's actions, and by extension his. Mio was suffering because of them, and yet she had tried to offer him the few silver coins she possessed. This was not the kind of evil he aspired to. His villainy was meant to be grand and magnificent, not the cause of suffering for the innocent and impoverished. He resolved to settle this matter personally, to restore his own twisted sense of honor. After a simple dinner, they prepared to rest for their raid the next day. Augur retired to his room, but just as he was about to drift off to sleep, he felt a weight settle on top of him. He opened his eyes and was shocked to see Sister Mio, her face flushed, asking him to give her some of his love. Completely bewildered, and asked her what on earth she was doing. Flustered, she explained that she knew her request was improper, but she needed him to teach her about love. Having been raised in a church and dedicated her life to service, she had never experienced romantic love. She was terrified that because she didn't understand it, she wouldn't be able to properly love and protect the children. She confessed that she herself had been an abandoned child, never knowing the love of a parent. A superficial love, she feared, would only lead to more incidents like the one with the thugs. With tears streaming down her face, she begged him for his compassion, to teach her what it meant to love. After listening to her desperate, heartfelt plea, Augur made his decision. He would not grant her request. He gently explained that what she was seeking was not love, but a distraction from her own insecurities. He didn't want her to waste her purity on a misguided attempt to fill a void within herself. While he understood her reasoning, he couldn't fulfill her demand. Besides, he privately admitted to himself he only liked women with large breasts, and Mio simply didn't fit his type. More importantly, he told her that the time wasn't right for the answer she sought. He assured her that if she was patient, she would find the true meaning of love on her own. His words, firm yet gentle, seemed to calm her. Her immediate crisis resolved, she left him in peace, allowing him to finally get some rest. The next morning, the trio set out for Alabon's headquarters. Augur checked on Mashiro, who had seemed a bit down lately. He asked if she was ready, and she responded with a bright, reassuring smile. Before they charged in, Augur reviewed their plan. Their primary goals were to eliminate Alabon's group and, more importantly, to test Mashiro's full capabilities. He confessed to himself that he saw Mashiro primarily as a harem member, not a fighter. But if she truly was a dual magic caster, that changed everything. He laid out the trial. Mashiro would fight them alone. He assured her, however, that he and Alice would be standing by to intervene if things went wrong. Mashiro, far from being nervous, seemed thrilled by the challenge. After a short journey, they arrived at Alabon's makeshift headquarters, an old warehouse. As planned, Alice kicked the door in. She strode inside, demanding to know if they were the group led by Alabon. She introduced herself as one of his old acquaintances. The thugs inside, a motley crew of brutes, burst out laughing, thinking she was a joke. Their laughter died in their throats when Alabon himself stepped out of the shadows. He greeted Alice by her old name, Chris, a nostalgic look on his face. They had been rivals in the arena. As his underlings moved to attack, Mashiro stepped forward. With a single, elegant gesture, she unleashed a torrent of frost and wind. Her magic, a swirling blizzard of razor-sharp ice, swept through the room, defeating all the thugs in a single, devastating blow. Augur watched, utterly astonished. He had not expected her to have such masterful control over her dual attributes, condensing her ice magic with wind to enhance its power to an extraordinary degree. After her display, Mashiro turned to him, seeking his approval. When he praised her performance, telling her it was beyond his wildest expectations, she flushed with pleasure. He then mused aloud that if she was this strong, she could have easily defeated Luark from the beginning. Mashiro, in her naivety, admitted she had never considered it. It was only now, with his encouragement, that she was beginning to realize her own true power. Their celebration was cut short as Alabon, moving with incredible speed, lunged at them. Augur managed to dodge just in time, but it was a close call. Alabon was a speed-type fighter. Recognizing this, Augur quickly formulated a new plan. He instructed Mashiro to use her ice magic to freeze Alabon's feet, giving him the opening he needed to strike. They moved in perfect unison. Mashiro focused, tracking Alabon's rapid movements with her wind magic. It was difficult, but just as she was about to catch him, she missed. Alabon slipped past and was about to strike her from behind. However, thanks to her quick reflexes and wind magic, she instinctively redirected a gust toward him. This gave her the opening to cast her ice magic, momentarily freezing Alabon in place. In this world, spells cast from reflex only last a few moments, and the ice was already beginning to crack. But that brief instant was all Augur needed. He surged forward and landed a powerful blow, sending Alabon crashing to the ground. Everyone was amazed, even Alice. Alabon himself was in disbelief. He had been the undisputed champion of the wuxia arena. To be defeated by a pair of kids was unthinkable. Desperate, he pulled out a small vial and drank its contents, a dangerous combat drug. His body began to contort and swell, his muscles bulging as he transformed into a hulking, monstrous version of himself. The odds had just shifted dramatically. Within a split second of his transformation, he moved, his fist connecting with Augur's face, leaving a small cut on his cheek. The sight of her master being wounded sent both Alice and Mashiro into a frenzy. Alice lunged forward to finish him, but Augur stopped her and stepped in. In a blur, he moved past Alabon, striking with a series of precise, crippling blows that brought the hulking man to his knees. Defeated, Alabon began to reflect. He had never known loss, had never even considered the possibility, yet this boy had bested him. Strangely, instead of anger, he felt awe. Bowing his head, he surrendered and pledged his loyalty to Augur, willing to serve as his subordinate. Augur, who had no plans for male subordinates, found himself in a peculiar position. On a whim, he accepted Alabon's offer, even granting him permission to build his new arena, but under his direct supervision. The decision shocked Alice, who couldn't understand why her master would condone the creation of such a place. Augur explained his reasoning with a veneer of kindness. An arena that welcomed all fighters, he argued, could generate a great deal of money for good causes. His words, though based on a self-serving logic, struck a chord with both Alabon and Alice, who now saw him as a truly benevolent leader they would follow for the rest of their lives. With their mission accomplished, they returned to the orphanage to give Sister Mio the good news. The relief she felt was so overwhelming that she burst into tears, which the children promptly misinterpreted as Augur being mean to her again. They began to insult his noble title, and Sister Mio, ashamed, blamed herself for not teaching them properly about love. In a touching display of loyalty, the children, thinking Augur was trying to take Sister Mio's money, gathered their most precious toys, their own kind of treasures, and offered them to him. Seeing their innocent sacrifice, a profound realization washed over Sister Mio. The overwhelming feeling of warmth and protectiveness she felt for them in that moment, that was love. Their work finally done, Augur prepared to head back to the academy. He made arrangements to move Sister Mio and the children to the Verret family territory. His two objectives had been achieved. He had tested Mashiro's capabilities, and he had secured a future labor force. He had provided them with housing and education, strengthening his path of evil, or so he thought. To everyone else, Alice, Mashiro, Mio, Alibon, and the children, he was not a villain, but a kind-hearted saint, a figure they would willingly serve for eternity. Back at the academy, life settled into a new normal. A month had passed since the orphanage incident. And the bond between Augur, Alice, and Mashiro had grown stronger. Karen, his former fiancée, had also become a more frequent presence in their lives. She was a figure of immense popularity at the academy. Despite being the crown prince's fiancée, she was kind, approachable, and treated everyone with respect, a stark contrast to the typical arrogance of the nobility. Whenever her path crossed with Augur's, however, an awkward tension still hung in the air. One day, Augur was taken aback by the sight of Mashiro's rather revealing physical education uniform. She seemed completely oblivious to the attention she was drawing from the male students, her mind focused solely on her upcoming magic training. This reminded Augur to give her an important instruction. She was not to use her powerful ice magic during training and to always suppress her power. Mashiro was confused, so Augur explained that her magic was too potent. If word got out, she would become a target. Mashiro felt a pang of guilt, thinking of her parents who worked so hard to pay her tuition. She needed to graduate with good grades to get a good job. Seeing her distress, Augur offered a heartfelt assurance, promising to look after her forever. The words made her blush deeply. Unseen, Karen had been eavesdropping on their entire conversation. A sharp pang of jealousy shot through her. Augur had only been at the academy for a short time, yet he was already surrounded by two cute girls. Unable to contain herself, she stepped out from her hiding place, surprising the group. She tried to play it off as a casual greeting, but she was clearly flustered. She formally introduced herself to Mashiro and even apologized for the trouble the Bombzell family, who were part of her faction, had caused. Augur initially assumed this apology was the reason for her approach, but then Karen delivered a message from the student council president. Rena Mulaney had not given up on recruiting him. Augur reiterated his refusal. He then asked Karen if she had joined the council, and she confirmed that she had. It was in her nature to want to help people. She confessed that she really wanted him to join so she could see him more often. But Augur, still misunderstanding her motives, gently but firmly shut her down. He reminded her that she was the Crown Prince's fiancée, and being seen with him would only cause trouble. His words clearly hurt her, but she hid her feelings and said her goodbyes. As she walked away, Augur called out that he'd be glad to see her around, a small comment that sent a wave of happiness and blush through her. In the days that followed, Karen began coincidentally bumping into their group with increasing frequency. Augur, ever analytical, noticed the pattern. One day, he saw Prince Arnia in the cafeteria, surrounded by his usual entourage of girls, while Karen was nowhere in sight. Mashiro happened to comment on Karen's tendency to cross-dress. The pieces began to fall into place for Augur. Karen was the only child of the Levitsenka family who desperately needed a male heir. They had raised her as a boy until the king had chosen her as Arnia's fiancée. But years of being forced to behave like a man had left her unable to embrace her femininity. Her clothes were always boyish, her demeanor more stoic than gentle. The prince, it seemed, had no interest in her, which was why he openly flirted with other women and allowed her to continue cross-dressing. Seeing the prince with his own de facto harem filled Augur with an unfamiliar irritation. Mashiro, noticing his mood, asked him seriously if he also dreamed of having many women follow him around. Her sharp blade-like gaze made him nervous, but Alice's timely arrival with snacks broke the tension. As he watched Mashiro happily eat a hamburger, Augur came to a conclusion. Mashiro was the jealous type, and he would have to be careful what he said around her. Then, he formulated a new theory about Karen. She must be trying to use him to make the Crown Prince jealous. The thought that she was trying to manipulate him, a master manipulator himself, was both insulting and amusing. He decided to play her game. Even if his theory was wrong, he would relish the challenge. His countermeasure was simple. He would actively pursue her. A girl trying to use a man for a jealousy ploy would be seriously troubled if that man actually started falling for her. He would win this non-existent battle of wits, no matter what. He had no idea that Karen's actions were born not of strategy, but of a genuine, long-held affection for him. His mind drifted back 10 years, to a memory from their childhood. At a grand party, a young Karen had run away to the garden, sobbing after being scolded by her father. Augur had found her and comforted her, telling her she wasn't a failure. He had given her a pretty hairpin, telling her it would look beautiful in her hair, a symbol that he would always be with her, even when he wasn't around. From that day on, she had seen him as her hero. The news that their engagement was called off due to his lack of magic had been devastating. Weak and powerless to defy her father, she had been forced to go along with it, a guilt she carried with her always. Putting his new plan into action, Augur sought out Karen. He began complimenting her relentlessly, calling her beautiful, telling her she shone as brightly as the sun. His sudden, intense attention left her completely flustered and breathless. He would get impossibly close, praise her cute, spaced-out expression, and then leave with a charming smile, leaving her heart pounding in her chest. Mashiro, witnessing this, asked what he was plotting. Augur explained his theory about Karen using him to make the prince jealous, and his brilliant counterplan to pursue her instead. He was determined to emerge victorious from this imaginary conflict. His campaign of compliments continued day after day. Rumors began to spread about them. Karen, however, was oblivious to the gossip, lost in a world of her own. She was hopelessly in love, and she began to believe that Augur shared her feelings. She started daydreaming about their wedding, their honeymoon, the children they would raise. Her romantic fantasies were shattered when her butler informed her she had a scheduled dinner with Prince Arnia. The reality of her situation came crashing back down. She met the prince, who was already irritated by her tardiness. The moment she sat down, he shamelessly demanded money, 5 gold coins. He claimed the king was being stingy and that he needed funds. He ordered her to get the money from her father if she didn't have it, a terrifying prospect for Karen, as her father saw her only as a political pawn and would surely beat her if he knew the prince was extorting her. The prince gave her a deadline of 1 week. Then, as a final, cruel twist of the knife, he told her that her long red hair was unpleasant to look at. He suggested that if she loved cross-dressing so much, she should just cut it off and look like a man for real. The words were a dagger to her heart. The only reason she had kept her hair long was because Augur, all those years ago, had told her it was pretty. The memory was the only thing that kept her from shattering completely. She fled the restaurant, sobbing, her one source of strength, now a source of immense pain. Later that evening, on his way back to the dorms, Augur ran into Rena Mulaney. The first thing he noticed was that her melons were fake that day, but he quickly pushed the thought aside. Rena got straight to the point. She asked when he had last seen Karen, explaining that Karen had been absent from a student council meeting without any reason, which was completely out of character. Rena was worried something had happened and asked for his help in searching for her. As they searched the campus, Rena told him the truth about Prince Arnia's treatment of Karen. It wasn't just a lack of interest, it was outright cruelty. She revealed that the prince had been extorting huge sums of money from Karen, using his position to torment her for his own sick pleasure. Rena had assumed that Augur's recent attention towards Karen was his way of trying to protect her. The revelation hit Augur like a ton of bricks. He had been so wrong. Karen wasn't using him, she was a victim. His grand villainous scheme had been built on a complete and terrible misunderstanding. He was now faced with a new, horrifying problem. If the daughter of a duke genuinely fell in love with him, his harem plans would be completely derailed. He had to correct this, and fast. He told Rena to wait in the student council office and promised to bring Karen there himself. After a frantic search, he found her where he knew she would be, hiding inside a closet, just as she used to do when they were kids. The memory brought a wave of emotion over Karen. She felt like she hadn't grown at all. Augur, trying to salvage the situation, assured her that she didn't have to pretend in front of him. They were childhood friends, after all. He hoped that by firmly placing her in the friend zone, he could diffuse her romantic feelings. He had no idea that his words, meant to create distance, had the opposite effect, making her feel even more intensely for him. He brought her to the student council office, where she apologized to Rena for her absence. With the three of them together, Rena brought up the subject of Prince Arnia. What should they do about him? Augur's ideal solution was for the prince to have a change of heart and become a worthy fiancé to Karen, but he couldn't just punish a crown prince like he had Luark. It was then that Rena proposed a radical solution, a formal duel with the prince through the Academy's official dueling system. The suggestion stunned both Augur and Karen. The dueling system was a time-honored tradition where, in cases of conflicting claims, two parties could fight in front of the entire student body, with the winner's claim being officially recognized. It meant Augur could openly fight the crown prince. Karen initially thought she would be the one to fight, but Augur immediately stepped in, declaring that he would gladly do it for her. Rena clarified one more crucial rule. The loser of the duel was honor-bound to grant one request from the winner, no matter what it was. Without a hint of hesitation, Augur confirmed his willingness to challenge the prince. The sight of his unwavering resolve, his willingness to face such danger for her sake, brought Karen to tears. In the back of Augur's mind, however, a new, brilliant plan was forming. This was the perfect opportunity. He would beat the prince to a pulp, break his arrogant spirit, and force him to turn over a new leaf. He was killing two birds with one stone. With Augur's agreement, the decision was finalized. All that was left was to get Prince Arnia's approval. As Karen and Augur prepared to leave, the stress of the day finally caught up to Karen. She felt dizzy and fell into Augur's arms, creating a dramatic, romantic scene that made Rena roll her eyes in annoyance. Alone in her office, Rena couldn't contain her excitement. Augur had moved exactly as she had hoped. She would finally get to witness the magic canceller that Luarik had described. She wondered how he would possibly fight against Prince Arnia's powerful magic. But what interested her most was the look in Augur's eyes when he accepted the duel, a clear, straightforward gaze filled with a righteous fire that, to her secret, twisted personality, was incredibly arousing. The next day, the official announcement of the duel between Augur Verid and Prince Arnia was posted, sending shockwaves through the academy. No one could believe that the magicless dropout would dare to challenge royalty. Even Augur was surprised at how quickly Rena had secured the prince's approval. The news made Mashiro an instant celebrity, with school paparazzi hounding her for information and photos of her voluptuous figure. Alice had to step in, her menacing aura enough to disperse the crowd. Augur reassured his two loyal followers that everything would be fine. Mashiro, calm by his confidence, wrapped her arms around him. He noted with satisfaction that his favorability with her, which had taken a hit after his pursuit of Karen, had skyrocketed once more. Both Alice and Mashiro promised to cheer for him with all their might. He then took them to a secluded spot to explain his plan. He called it Operation, the birth of a new prince. His goal was to beat Arnia, force him to change his ways, and make him treat Karen better. Just as he was proudly explaining his strategy, the prince himself appeared. Arnia thanked Augur for the duel proposal, his voice dripping with sarcasm. He couldn't stand the fact that a dropout had challenged him. To save face and twist the narrative in his favor, Arnia had changed the official reason for the duel. He announced that they were now fighting for Karen's love. The move was a stroke of manipulative genius, casting him as a hero, fighting for his fiancée's honor. It would surely make him more popular with the girls. The match was set for the day after tomorrow. The prince's audacity infuriated Augur. This man's personality was so rotten, he doubted even a sound thrashing would reform him. Then, the prince made his gravest mistake. His eyes fell on Alice and Mashiro, and he declared that after he won, he would be taking them from Augur. He had a particular fondness for stealing women who belonged to others. Augur's demeanor turned deadly. As the prince reached a hand towards Alice, Augur's own hand shot out, snapping his away. A deathly look entered Augur's eyes as he warned Arnia, his voice a low growl, not to lay a finger on either of them, or he would face consequences far worse than losing a duel. The sheer intensity of Augur's threat made Arnia back down, trying to play it off as a harmless joke. But as he left, he vowed that after the duel, the girls would be his. Once the prince was gone, the deadly aura emanating from Alice was still palpable. Augur had been trying to handle this peacefully, but the arrogant prince had practically thrown himself into a nuke. It was a good thing he had intervened, or Arnia would already be a corpse. Mashiro, overcome with relief, pressed herself against Augur, a gesture he thoroughly enjoyed. Alice voiced her concern that such a rotten man could become the next king. She had no information on his abilities or magic attributes, but as royalty, he was bound to have inherited powerful magic. She wondered what Augur's plan was. It turned out he had one. He led them to the practice tower, using the key Rena had given him. She had permitted him to use the tower to train for the next 2 days. Inside, Augur explained his new strategy. Since the entire school would be watching, he couldn't use his delete skill. It was a secret he needed to protect. Therefore, he had to find another way to defeat a powerful magician. He asked Mashiro to use her ice magic to create a continuous blizzard inside the tower. He felt a pang of guilt for making Alice and Mashiro the stakes in this duel, but he swore to them that he would win and protect them. He then stripped to the waist, his powerful physique on full display, causing both girls to blush. He explained his plan. He was going to meditate in the heart of the magical blizzard. His entire life, he had relied on erasing magic before he could even experience its effects. Now, he needed to fight while sensing magic with his own body. For the next 2 days, he would expose himself to Mashiro's continuous snow magic, forcing his body to acclimate, to learn the flow and feel of magic. Mashiro was worried he would get sick, but Alice, ever faithful, knew her master would be fine. Mashiro, though still anxious, resolved to do her part. She would make it snow for 2 days straight without a break. In this world, Magic was created when spirits of various attributes, water, wind, fire, earth, thunder, and light, were infused with matching magic power. Augur, however, had no matching spirits. His magic power, inherited in massive quantities from the Verret family, was like poison to them. This was the secret behind his delete skill. By infusing his own power into an opponent's spellcasting spirits, he could cancel their magic. Since he couldn't use that in the duel, he endured. For 2 days and 2 nights, he sat in the freezing storm, enduring the pain, his body and mind focused on a single goal. A day before the duel, he finally achieved his breakthrough. He could now sense the flow of magic with pinpoint accuracy, predicting when and where it would appear and disappear. With this newfound perception, he knew he could not lose to any magician, not even the Crown Prince. The day of the duel arrived. The arena was packed, the crowd buzzing with excitement. Bets were placed, with nearly everyone backing the prince. In the VIP section, Duke Gordon Verret sat beside Principal Floan. He was here as both a doting parent and a necessary authority, should the duel's outcome require his ducal permission. In the contestants' room, Karen was a bundle of nerves. She believed in Augur's strength, but the stakes were terrifyingly high. Augur, in contrast, was a picture of perfect composure. Karen asked what he would demand from the prince if he won. Augur realized he hadn't decided. His goal was to reconcile her with a reformed Arnia, but he couldn't just demand that. So, he turned the question back to her, asking what she, deep in her heart, truly wished for. It was the first time anyone had ever asked for her personal desire. With tears in her eyes, she whispered the words she had held locked in her heart for so long. She wanted to be with Augur forever. But her voice was so soft, her expression so conflicted, that Augur completely misunderstood. He thought she was referring to the prince, wishing for a true relationship with him. With a determined smile, he promised Karen that after the duel was over, her wish would come true. They entered the arena to a deafening roar. The girls cheered for Arnia. The boys, who had all suffered from the prince's womanizing, roared for Augur, their unlikely champion. Before the duel began, Arnia tried one last petty power play, demanding Augur's white battle coat, but the coats were magically fixed and could not be swapped. With the formalities settled, the duel began. Arnia immediately initiated an attack, summoning his earth spirit. He was powerful, but he was also arrogant. He began a long, showy incantation for a large-scale spell, leaving himself completely exposed. Augur stood perfectly still. He was not tense. He was profoundly disappointed. He had researched magic, polished his combat techniques, and endured hellish training. He had expected a formidable opponent, and all he got was this preening fool. He could end it with a single punch. The prince, oblivious, began to taunt him, calling Karen a loser crossdresser and admitting that she was nothing more than a wallet to him. The public insult to Karen, the person he had just sworn to protect, was the last straw. The disappointment in Augur's eyes was replaced by a cold, burning rage. As Arnia finally unleashed his massive earth-based spell, a barrage of rock and stone, Augur moved. With his eyes closed, guided by his newly honed senses, he weaved through the attacks as if they were standing still. He appeared before the shocked prince and, with a single explosive blow, sent him flying. His anger unquenched, he continued to punch the downed prince until he was knocked completely unconscious. The crowd was stunned into silence. Arnia's fans were crestfallen. Augur was declared the winner. He had accomplished his objective. He had defeated the prince. Now, it was time for Karen to make her request. Augur expected her to ask the prince to start over with her, to begin a real engagement. But to his and everyone else's utter astonishment, Karen's voice rang out, clear and strong. She requested that the prince cancel their engagement, and then she turned to him, her eyes shining with hope and love, and declared that she wanted to be engaged to Augur Verret instead. The duel's rules were absolute. The request had to be honored. Principal Floan and Duke Gordon made it official right then and there. The crowd erupted in cheers, congratulating the new couple. But Augur heard none of it. His mind was a maelstrom of panic and horror. His harem plan, his grand villainous design, his entire life's purpose. It was all up in smoke. The grave news was too much for his system to handle. His eyes rolled back in his head, and he collapsed onto the arena floor in a dead faint. 3 hours later, he awoke in the infirmary to the sight of his new and very official fiancée, Karen, smiling down at him. She looked more appealing, more terrifying, but there was something that caught him completely off guard, something he never imagined he'd see. Alright, here's my review of this manga. It's basically a harem-type series, but honestly, it's fun. It isn't bad at all. The main character's goal is to be evil and build a harem, which is actually a pretty unique spin. I've seen this concept become really popular lately, but this manga does something I really like. While it stays fully focused on the protagonist, it still gives other characters a chance to shine. For me, that's a win-win. The story progression is decent and keeps things entertaining. Overall, I'd say it's a solid read.